and ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. This is Irreverend, Faith and Current Affairs.
Hello, and welcome back to Irreverend, Faith and Current Affairs. I'm Jamie Franklin, and I'm joined by my esteemed colleagues Thomas Pelham and Daniel French, all vicars in the Church of England. Fellows, how art thou this fair autumn day? Somebody has to answer.
I'm really well. Oh, we're both really well. I don't know. Daniel looks all right.
Yeah, I'm fine.
Yeah.
I'm in what's called sabbatical.
Yeah,
4 months sabbatical. So hooray!
Nice. And you having good? How long have you been doing it? How is it going?
This is day 2.
Yeah. Okay. So not very long then.
No.
I mean, you look relaxed. You're wearing a hoodie, so great. That's good.
Are we allowed to know any plans for this sabbatical? Have you got
I'm book writing, so I might enter into a form of madness.
Yeah,
Fair
that's
enough.
good. Yeah, it's fun. It's fun descending into madness when you're on some kind of intellectual project. I've had that experience, and it's
really filled with post-its the next time you look here. So.
Yeah. Like you're the man in that Russell Crowe film. What's it called? You know, Beautiful Mind. Is that film where he sort of does he cover his wall in post-it notes and stuff?
Do you know the one real life example of that I've heard of was quite a cool story. Actually, it was a chap who kept finding post-it notes around his computer, and they were completely indecipherable, and he couldn't work out what's happening. He would literally find them, and no one else had access to the house. It's just him living alone, just post-it notes everywhere. And a Reddit user diagnosed correctly that what was happening was he had carbon monoxide poisoning, which was causing him to have short-term memory loss.
Really?
So he'd write himself post-it notes and then forget they'd written them, and then get worried that people were, when he found them again. And it was the case. He went out, got a carbon monoxide monitor, and put it in, and there was malfunctioning central heating system, and it saved his life effectively, because it's not good to be poisoned. I've heard.
Yeah.
So there you are, post-it notes.
That is a truism.
I don't think we've got the likelihood of that, though. In this part of Devon, radon poisoning is probably more likely.
You do get from your granite. You get quite high levels of radiation, don't you?
I've got a colleague in Oakhampton, or Chagford actually, who has the most radioactive vicarage in Britain. It has the most extraordinary setup of radon detectors.
I was going to say, for the moment, at least, For
the moment.
For the episode titles, throwing all kind of orthodoxy to do with SEO to the winds. I just find some phrase said within the episode that I think is funny or interesting, and I think I've already found it this week, which is radioactive vicarages. So that will be unless something changes, unless something good or better comes up, I'm going to call this episode "Radioactive Vicarages" because that's a wonderful juxtaposition of images. So thank you.
And if you don't, then everyone who's listened to this point can now spend the rest of the episode until whatever's said is said, knowing that something even better is going to come up. So there you are. That's incentive to keep listening, chaps.
This is meta, isn't it? This episode is called Radioactive Vicarages, or is it? Because something else might happen, something else even better than that. That is a good phrase, though. So I just wanted to give a shout out to St. Philip the Apostles Church in Tottenham. I went there on Sunday, met some friends of the show, some listeners. So it's great. I love meeting people in person. It's really, really nice. And they were very encouraging and nice. And I had a great time in general. Tom, you're worried about the threat of nuclear war, aren't you?
Well, I'm worried that people aren't taking it very seriously. At least, at least over the, say, 20th century, the kind of the second half of the 20th century, the thrust of international politics was generally to try and avoid it, to talk people down to. I mean, there's a great article in Unheard pointing out that actually, so people have been quite dismissive about the idea that, Russia aren't going to use nukes, they're not going to deliberately use nukes, it'd be foolish. And yeah, they're right, they would, but that's not actually the risk of nuclear war, isn't from that. The risk comes the longer you have attention and deployed forces capable of using them, that someone makes a mistake. And there's a pointed out, it's a rather good article in Unheard from Thomas Farsi, pointing out that the closest the world has come to nuclear war has not been because one country is about to declare war on another and launch. It's actually the accidental orders, people who mistakenly reading. There's a famous one in Russia where a chap averted nuclear war. A particular meteorological effect caused the early launch warning system to go for it and show that. Or was it possibly a test being run? I can't remember.
It was that. His name escapes me. Subsequently, years later, he became something of a sort of national hero. And I think also on the basis of that, the Americans and the Russians have had well, in those days it would have been a fax system, but they have a telephone which says, where at least two honest people can say, "Oh, you're actually firing something at us."
Yeah, that's a good idea.
I know we're all going to die, but is this for real, sort of thing? And apparently that is very much still in operation.
Yeah.
Though was this the article, the Unheard article? Was it the one that said about that association of actuaries who've worked out the?
No, it's not. It's a different one. So that's been sort of there's been a few different ideas shunted around about the risk of a nuclear war, but they tend to be based they tend to be based on the risk of one of the involved states doing something. And this Farsi quite correctly points out that it's not just about how likely is it actually going to be happen. It's how the longer we're at a point where it might happen, that people are talking about it, that forces are on readiness, the more there is a chance that something will happen that will trigger it accidentally. The whole.
Or Tom, the other possibility, of course, is the Dr. Strangelove scenario, isn't it, where you get some rogue lunatic deciding to take it into his own hands.
Yeah,
and actually press the nuclear button himself. That was the first film I was thinking of, Dr. Strangelove, which is a great film. But the other one is
Crimson Tide. Have you seen Crimson Tide?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. And that's another scenario, isn't it, where the message is sent through to the nuclear submarine, but it gets cut off halfway through. And so what do you do? The Russians could be firing right now. So, we should fire back, or maybe we shouldn't, because if we're wrong, we're starting a nuclear war.
It's a great film. Absolutely. It's so
have you seen it, Daniel?
Yeah, I have. Yes,
so good. I want to watch it right now. Let's stop recording this podcast.
But the thing is that our foreign policy should be aimed. I mean, even if we're talking a remote chance of nuclear war, the more our foreign policy is aimed towards a situation where that's growing, is the wrong foreign policy. I mean, in the end,
going in the other direction, shouldn't it?
Should be going in the other direction.
You should be trying to scale it down. Like this thing, Biden said when he said, "Oh yeah, we're closer to nuclear war than we've ever been." He should probably not be saying that kind of thing in public. I think.
No, I think so. Well, it's very. I think it's very hard to control what Biden says in public, isn't it?
I saw on Twitter this week he'd been saying he said something like the government has given people the right to. What was it? It was something like he was trying to say that the government is not legislating for what people do in their bedrooms, but he sort of said something like the government is now legislating. He phrased it in such a way as it sounded like they were actually legislating in people's bedrooms. I can't if anyone can put it in the comments below, but it was like a gaffe which made it sound like the government has given itself its right to legislate in people's bedrooms or something like that. I can't remember. It was quite funny.
So the point being that the war is entering a sort of fair deadlock. There have been Ukrainian advances, there have been Russian advances, there have been various things happening. The longer this happens, the worse outcome for the people there and for there's no simple solution. It looks quite likely that it was actually partly Boris Johnson who talked the Ukrainians out of pursuing peace seriously back in the spring, which if that is the case, then that's madness. I mean, what business is it ours, for one thing? And also, generally speaking,
where did you hear that?
Well, I mean, it's in this article, and it's not the first time I've heard it from different sources. So he went and met. So there was Right. This is slightly hearsay-ish, so I'm not certain. It's pulling off an article by David Ignatius in the Washington Post. Russia had been prepared for a peaceful settlement in the negotiations brokered by Turkey in Istanbul in late March, but the Ukraine and the West balked from it. Then in April, according to multiple US officials, Russia and Ukraine had agreed a tentative deal to end the war, only for Boris Johnson to fly to Kiev and bring the negotiations to an end, according to Ukrainian pro-Western sources. So, and I remember him going. There's pictures of him, wandering around with Zelensky.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
That's really quite terrible, isn't it? I mean, I'm not convinced that we have particularly strong strategic reasons to be mucking around in a war between Ukraine and Russia.
And it's interesting. Also, I find that on the progressive side of politics, that there's if not silence, certainly there seems to be a sort of an egging on of a war's. Of a war. It's quite extraordinary, actually. If you think that 4 or 5 years ago, when Donald Trump was elected, people were saying, "Oh, this is the end of the world. This guy's going to start World War III."
He's got his finger on the nuclear button.
Lefties crying in the streets that we're heading towards an apocalypse. And now that when you speak to a number of people in that constituency, they quite openly say, "Oh, well, we should just go to war with Russia." You're like,
I know. It's bizarre.
Send the SAS in to assassinate Putin. You're like, what?
I had this conversation with one of my.
Are you seriously saying this?
I had this conversation with someone. I say, but is there any guarantee that Putin is going to be replaced by some sort of peace-loving, or is he going to be replaced by more hardline elements? Because I'm not certain. Most likely. Well, exactly, because destabilizing regimes tends to lead to more and more hardline, So all in all, I mean, I'm not pro Putin. I don't think he should be invading other countries. I think there is a sort of wider question about. We've spoken about it many times about what Ukraine have been doing in Donbass region, and and the shelling and the ongoing civil war there that's conveniently forgotten about quite often, and also a wider question about what NATO have been doing in terms of expansionism that's open to debate. But all of that aside, let's be pursuing politics and an international sort of relations. Foreign affairs that leads to peace and not egging on war, especially when one of the countries is nuclear capable. Because
I think that's very wise, Tom. And let's all agree on that. If indeed we do agree, I don't want to force consensus. But given those wise words, I think it would be a good idea to just have a word of prayer and then introduce some scripture into the proceedings. Just for people who are not as familiar with the show, we are indeed vicars in the Church of England, and we talk about current affairs as the name of the show, Faith and Current Affairs, suggests, not incredibly subtly. And so what we do at the beginning is we like to have just a word of scripture and maybe a couple of comments on it, just to show how the scriptures speak to the world today, the world we live in, and the circumstances we face. And indeed, I think this one does in a very direct way, especially given what we've just been talking about. So let's read the scripture first, because we normally say the Lord's Prayer before the scripture, but we're not going to do that this week. And the reason for that is going to become very clear right now. For in fact, we are reading from the Gospel of Matthew, verse 6.
Chapter 6.
Oh, chapter 6. Yeah. Anyone would think that I was an incompetent vicar. Matthew chapter 6, verses 7 to 15. It's funny how easy it is to do that kind of thing. Yeah. All right. Anyway, here we go. I was trying to be too clever, and the Lord humbled me, as indeed we all need to be humbled through Thomas Pelham's agency. Matthew 6. So I've forgotten what I was doing now. Okay, so these are the words of Christ on the Sermon on the Mount. And when you pray, do not heap up empty phrases as the Gentiles do, for they think that they will be heard for their many words. Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask him. Pray then like this: Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we also have forgiven our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For if you forgive others their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive others their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses. There we are. So Christ's teaching on the Lord's Prayer and how to pray more generally. I don't really have loads to say about this. One of the things I would say is that if anyone's, we have lots of people who listen to this podcast who are sort of proximate to Christianity or who are getting into it for the first time. The Lord's Prayer is a great prayer to pray and to use, in your sort of daily devotion, when you wake up in the morning or something like that. But it's also a good thing to sort of model your prayers around. And I do this sometimes. I find it quite helpful to think about, almost break it down into sections, so the first part is about God's kingdom coming, in our own lives and on the earth around us. The section about our daily bread is about praying for God's provision. The next section is about asking God to forgive us, and thinking about the people who we need to forgive as a kind of response to God's grace in our life. And then the final section is about praying that God would help us with temptation and things we find difficult in our lives. So I find it's quite a helpful thing to actually base your prayers around. But Tom, Daniel's disappeared. I don't know where he is, but so I'll say this bit to you. It's interesting, isn't it, that we've just been talking about nuclear war and the unrest between the nations. And you're thinking, what should be the political aim for the Christian? What should the Christian be hoping and longing for? And sometimes it's hard to say exactly what it is, but in a general sense, you could say, well, the Christian's aim is that the kingdom of God would come upon this earth as it is in heaven. And we certainly know in this case that the best reflection of the kingdom of God on earth would surely not be a nuclear war between Russia and a Western nation.
Probably not. I always like this passage. It always
it's quite a good one, isn't it?
It's lovely, and the prayer itself in Greek is quite interesting. So the three clauses come together in much more clearly in the Greek than in the English, and those are: "Hallowed be your name, your kingdom come, your will be done." Because they're actually in the original Greek, they're sort of you might render them closely to be: "Hallowed be the name of you, come the kingdom of you, done be the will of you." That's got that "of you" bit at the end, which in Greek is soon.
It rhymes,
and it rhymes, which sort of links those three phrases quite nicely, and they actually link quite well theologically as well, because wherever God's name is hallowed, his kingdom is coming, and wherever his kingdom is coming, his will is being done, and part of his will is to hallow his name. So there's sort of it's a sort of recipe for God's kingdom to be made present on earth as it is in heaven, is to hallow God's name and to do his will, and that will bring his kingdom into being, or at least make his kingdom. It won't bring his kingdom into being, because that sort of implies that we're building it. God's built it in us effectively by doing those things. I think it's fair to say. And I've always, and also the other nice thing in the Greek is the daily bread bit, which is a tricky one to translate. Actually, it's for something that's so often said in churches. There's very little certainty about what it actually means. I think sort of one Catholic translation calls it the super essential bread, doesn't it?
Really helping the laity to understand the meaning of the scriptures there.
And
great translation. Super essential bread, but really speaks to me.
But the point is that it's not just asking for our daily physical needs, although those we should bring to God, but it's also asking for our spiritual sustenance, and there's obvious Eucharistic overtones as well. Really, regardless of how you view the Eucharist, there's obvious Eucharistic overtones. So, and
then also a daily reliance on God, which is fixed on the simplicity of the day, isn't it? And I'm not asking for a lottery win. I'm not asking for all my problems to be solved. I'm just seeking to be able to, with God, win the day to some respect.
Yeah, relying on God's strength for the day, day by day, and that relates to what Christ says later on in the Sermon on the Mount, which is really one of my favorite passages, where he says, "Don't be anxious about tomorrow, for tomorrow will be anxious for itself. Sufficient for the day is its own trouble." This idea that we rely on God for strength day by day. One of the reasons is a good prayer to pray in the morning, because it's a prayer for the rest of the day. Yeah. So no, it's a good passage. I think we all agree it's a pretty good prayer.
And one last thing is the idea of forgiving us our debts as we have forgiven our debtors. There's a sort of and this really reminds us that forgiveness is something. There's a flourishing of the kingdom, really. And that's probably a good place to start with international relationships as well. I mean, it's a hard place to start because what the world wants is retribution, but what the Lord's Prayer teaches is firstly we ask God for forgiveness because we have and we make sure we forgive those who have wronged us. And if you don't do that, then you get stuck in.
And it's asking us to dial down our anger arousals in the, I mean, there's righteous anger, but there's also what we see at the moment, isn't it? Is that background radiation of perpetual anger and that we are via the media and particularly social media constantly being, flamed up.
Yes.
And you have to wonder, if you do that to a whole culture, how does that culture then engage with conflict? Does it begin to see every culture as if it's a sort of Marvel comic book, where there are no gray areas, and I'm the hero and you're the villain?
Yes.
And it's very binary. And you consider how some of the areas of global conflict in the last generation or two, I think particularly here in South Africa, a lot of and Northern Ireland and such, there's been a sense to dig down into the subtleties. And in the end, that goes right down to the human heart, that you recognize, that there's a monster in each of us potentially.
Yep, absolutely. Well, I think we should move on, given everything that's just been said, to our first feature of the week. But first, why don't we say the Lord's Prayer now together? And I invite all listeners and viewers to pray the Lord's Prayer with us, which we'll do in the traditional version. So let us pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Jamie, that's not actually a traditional version of the Lord's Prayer, though, is it? I just for literature geeks out there, it's the ASB, isn't it? It's an updated language version of the traditional one.
But when you say the traditional version, it's what people think.
It's what the International Committee for Liturgy in the 1970s agreed with the Roman Catholic Church. With the traditional form, but I know.
The Cramnerian form is Our Father which art in heaven.
Yeah, yes. In every church you get somebody, when you say, let us pray, you get somebody in the background going, which in this passive aggressive, slightly amplified voice, in order to make the point that they don't accept the changes in the Lord's Prayer by these liturgical committees. Who do they think they are?
But there are people who won't, some of our listeners new to Christianity won't be aware.
They'll be thinking, what the heck are you talking about?
In Anglican liturgical wars, there is an even newer version. I mean, there's
it's horrible.
It's awful. It's for yours. Who would say that? Yours is
and it's really confusing because I think you can get you can bring people into church and you come to the bit where everybody probably thinks, oh, I know this. And you end up with two different versions of it.
Oh,
do you mean to say you've not exercised it from every liturgy book in your church, Daniel? Because
it's horrible.
All bar one. There's that I noticed popped up recently. We've brought out a service booklet pre-lockdown that had it for a midweek, and I noticed it popped up again. I thought, ooh. I thought I'd done a reprint with the change on that, but it is. I had someone who really had a go at me for this. Another vicar who said how backward it was that I was using the traditional version.
Honestly,
and my reply was, when at Freddie Mercury's funeral.
Freddie Mercury.
Yeah, Freddie Mercury had
That's esoteric, isn't it? Okay, go on.
Had a memorial service years before your time, and David Bowie stood up and, to some protest later on, led everybody in the Lord's Prayer.
Right.
What version did he use?
Which one?
It wasn't.
It's the traditional, isn't it? It's obviously traditional. Otherwise, he wouldn't have told the story.
Our Father in heaven, and everybody joined in. So this idea that.
Can you do a Bowie impression?
Can
you do a Bowie impression? Our Father. I don't know.
Major Tom.
All right. Okay. I think that's enough liturgy.
We've lost now half.
We've lost 1,000 listeners there. Right. So this week we're bringing a new feature which I didn't have a name for last week. The name I thought it was rubbish. But this week we've got a name which I did actually think of, but it was inspired by a suggestion, and I'm calling it Twits on Twitter. So it's now time for Twits on Twitter. Now, chaps, the way it's going to work is that we're going to listen to something from Twitter, not watch it, because frankly, I'm not really sure how to do that well at the moment. And today I've chosen to look at a tweet that was tweeted out by a man called Damien Gale. He says, activists with @JustStopOil, and you know what I'm going to say, they've thrown tomato soup on Van Gogh's sunflowers at the National Gallery and glued themselves to a wall. So there's a video of two young women. They do look very young. One has got pink hair. One has more traditional dark hair. They throw a can of soup straight on the sunflowers. There is a bit of glass on there, apparently, which protected them, thank goodness. And then they glued their hands to the wall. And then the pink-haired one gave the following speech. Now, it's interesting. The initial video, so there are two videos. The first one has been viewed 42 million times of them actually throwing the soup on the wall. The second one's only 5.8 million times, so not quite as many, which is a shame, because this is where the actual intellectual depth and caliber of the thinking behind these actions is revealed. So here we go. Wait a minute.
What is worth more, art or life?
Oh, by the way, I forgot to say, the way this works is we listen to this, and when you want to make a comment, you just say, hang on, stop. And then we talk about it. So let's start again, shall we? Here we go. So this is the pink hair Just Stop Oil woman. Here we go. This is it.
What is worth more, art or life?
Now I wanted to stop it there because that's a question that's been plaguing me ever since I've heard it. What is worth more, art or life? That is a hard question to answer, isn't it? Because you think, well, it's probably life, isn't it? But what is life without art? Do you see?
So my mind went immediately to the it's sort of we've sort of spoken about this before. I mean, this concept of what life is worth and what art is worth are two completely different currencies, so you can't really compare them. So I mean, if you try and render life into money, then actually Van Gogh's sunflowers is probably worth about 68 lives. I don't know quite how much it was last time, but I think it's £1 million the road people will pay, which is a funny thing to say, really, isn't it?
So hang on a second. So what are you saying? It's worth £68 million?
Something like that. It could be more.
And it's £1 million a life. Okay, I see.
Well, that's, it's a slightly pointless question. It's like asking, what is worth more, trees or cup of soup?
Yeah. Or like saying what's worth more, chocolate bars or money or something like that. It's like you can actually, it doesn't really, like, life is kind of, it's kind of an unknown quantity, really, isn't it? It depends what kind of life you're talking about. But I think that the existential question that she's really driving at is, when you take art and beauty out of the world, what is life? What is left? At least I think that's what's behind what she's saying.
Well,
I don't think what she's actually saying is she has the power to destroy art.
Yes.
And that in the revolutionary spirit, that act should be given primacy in comparison to, say, we shouldn't be worried about this. We should be more worried about the environment.
Yes, I think that's what she's saying. I was being slightly ironic, but I think that's right. I think what she's saying is, I've just thrown a can of tomato soup over this beautiful art, and you're all shocked by it. But what you should actually be shocked by is the destruction of the environment. A little bit like, if you were to go outside, say if I was to go outside and just expose myself, I could,
Where's this going, Jamie?
And then I said,
would anybody be worried?
No, if I went out and did that, and then I said, you know what? The only thing you care about is the fact that I've exposed myself in public, but you're not concerned about the destruction of the environment. It's a little bit like that, isn't it? Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, the subtext on that.
I'm not planning on doing that, and I have never done it before.
No,
sorry, Daniel.
It's a bit cold this time of the year as well.
It's too cold, apart from anything else.
But isn't the subtext to that? It's about power.
Yes.
It's what's not being said is this person saying I feel disenfranchised, and look at me, I'm quite turned on by destroying something beautiful that in its sense is powerful because it's the most, it's one of the most famous pieces of art in the world.
Yeah.
So it's that I'm somehow not on the top of the hierarchy, and I'm really annoyed about that.
But it's a weird thing to say because, eco loons are pretty much on the top of the hierarchy. I mean, that's where they are. I mean, if anything, the people who are not being heard are the people who are skeptical about it. So I find it's a bit like these people who've glued themselves to the bridge around the M25.
The establishment are on their side. They're supporting this. This. They're not removing them. So another thing, this is actually serious point. Daniel, you shared with me, didn't you, that excellent speech by Edward Lee, the MP, who was saying that we don't need this new law suggesting this kind of buffer zone around abortion clinics. And he makes this comparison with Just Stop Oil, where he says, these people, they're mostly sort of older women, sort of quietly, praying, silently praying, or handing out leaflets to women about crisis pregnancies and how, what support is available and things like that. And if you compare that, in inverted commas, protest against what's going on with Just Stop Oil, and these and basically very, very little is done to actually to stop these people doing what they're doing, which is shutting down massive infrastructure, sections of the M25 and so on. It's like chalk and cheese. It's a complete double standard, isn't it?
Yeah.
Anyway, should we carry on?
Should we carry on? Yeah. Okay.
We've only had one statement so far. I mean, I'm excited to hear what this young thinker has got to say. Let's continue.
Oh, is there more? Is there?
Oh, that was one statement. Yeah, this is the game, Daniel. We do the whole, we carry on with this. There's 35 seconds of this. We've watched 5 seconds so far. Right, here we go.
Is it worth more than food?
Is it worth more than food? That's art. Is art worth more than food? Again,
Yes, probably.
Yeah, probably. The painting's worth. The painting's worth several £1 million. So you could buy lots of food with the painting. So in a literal sense, yes, it is. But figuratively, is it worth more than food? Interesting. Here we go.
Worth more than justice.
Worth more than justice. Not sure. Again, hard to quantify.
Are you more concerned about the protection of a painting or the protection of our planet and people?
Okay. Well, there we have another.
What do you think, Tom? What are you?
Well, it's. About? I mean,
I think painting personally.
Well, I'm quite keen on protecting the planet, but I just don't agree that what we're doing is necessary. It's a non sequitur, isn't it? I mean,
it's actually a false dichotomy, isn't it?
That's it. A false dichotomy.
You can be concerned about protecting the arts and not letting vandals break in and throw tomato soup over it, and you can also be concerned about people and the environment. So,
how do these people get in? I mean, you're quite.
You can walk into the. You can walk in.
But you're like frisked, and do they not?
They don't frisk you for soup, do you?
Would they not take soup off you?
Okay. I mean, have you ever tried to smuggle soup into the National Gallery?
No, I don't really go there.
Well, I'm not going there if I see these kind of people. I can assure you. This is
okay.
But imagine, guys, if you or I went into the gallery and like super glued ourselves to
what would we do?
Van Gogh's?
Why?
And did on the basis of some injustice, some societal injustice.
Yeah.
Maybe we should do it. Maybe this should be this great mission opportunity, really, isn't it? Just go in there, glue ourselves to things, and shout. What is worth more, Christ, or I don't know,
or art.
Or art, yes, that's it. Christ or art, yeah.
And then make a number of other comparison, like rhetorical comparisons. The answer to which is not clear. Yeah,
you could take any number of causes, from pro-life to anti-lockdown to whatever, and I suspect that as soon as we opened our mouth as to the cause,
you'd be out on your own.
The response from the authorities.
Yep.
It'd be an interesting experiment, wouldn't it? Although I'm not really prepared to try it myself. If anyone's interested.
So it's interesting, isn't it, to say to speculate. I honestly don't know what happened. How did they get these people out? Because if you super glue your hand to a wall, presumably it would take all the skin off if you.
You just need it's hot water. What you need is the stuff that takes off nail polish.
Oh, okay. So maybe they use that. But with all I'm saying is, with us, if we were in there doing a pro-life protest and we super glued our hands to the wall, they would just rip us off, wouldn't they? They'd say, "Come on, Sonny Jim." It's not
that. I mean, I accidentally super glued my fingers together while doing some modelling. And it was irritating, but they did come apart with enough force. It didn't rip the skin or anything.
Were you like this?
No, it was like that. I had literally had it. It was quite firm, actually.
Yeah, I don't want to be crass, but that reminds me of what happens in one of the Adrian Mole books with some super glue in a model airplane. I won't say exactly. Well, it's a very part of Adrian Mole, which I remember reading as a teenager and finding it absolutely hysterical. Anyway, let's carry on with this video, shall we? Here we go. So we just had. Are you more concerned about the protection of painting, blah blah blah? Here we go.
The cost of living crisis is part of the cost of oil crisis.
Now, I don't understand that, because surely the cost of living crisis is caused by a shortage in energy. So what's that? Sorry, carry on.
Oh yeah, well it does. I mean, it's not the finest bit of rhetoric, isn't it? Because you can always say, well, in that case, should we get more oil?
Yeah, so that's the point, isn't it? If we have more oil, then energy would be cheaper and the cost of living would come down. So I just think she's wrong there. I don't really see.
No, she's right, but she doesn't.
I think a lot of progressives have really struggled with the cost of living backstory, and now throwing anything onto it, because I think they know they're wrong-footed. That 2 years of lockdowns, and incredible overspend in governments and quantitative easing over generations has probably got us more than anywhere else to the point where we're at. Because that doesn't sound like a fashionable cause or injustice. The fact that we've all been spending too much on our credit cards and been going for cheapo mortgages, and that the on a macro scale that everybody's been doing the same thing in the wholesale finance industry for years. We've all been just spend.
It's hard to see how it's got anything to do with using oil. I don't see that. And also, just in general in this speech, I really liked all the rhetorical questions earlier. I thought, that's really interesting. That's really making me think. And now she just comes out with this kind of declarative statement. And you think, to me, that's really brought the speech down as a piece of rhetoric. So, I'm not loving that. Let's see what she says next.
Fuel is unaffordable to millions of cold, hungry families.
But if you stop using oil, then how is that going to change? I don't understand what she's saying. Am I wrong there? Tell me what.
Well, I don't think the technology exists to provide energy at the level it is needed. This is the whole problem with that. I mean, I don't actually disagree that we should reduce reliance on fossil fuels. I mean, just because they're probably finite, and therefore, if we want to have a civilization that's sustainable in on the long term, we probably do need to go to nuclear, and maybe a little bit of this and that, but most nuclear, because the rest of this and that isn't really reliable enough, and it's much more expensive. But in the short term, which is what they're talking, as far as I understand, it makes no sense.
It doesn't make any sense, does it?
You could look at you could look at graphs of GDP over 2,000 years and see that, particularly since the Second World War, Western economies that have grown tremendously because of gas and petroleum.
Yeah. So it's a very strange way to say, oh, this is really expensive, we should stop oil. Well, that will just make it more expensive. So anyway,
maybe she's going to make it.
She's got 5 seconds left, so let's see what she's got to say. She's picking up the soup can now. Here we go.
Cold, hungry families. They can't even afford to heat a tin of soup.
Well, apparently she's got enough money to waste soup.
Well, I mean, this is a bit hypocritical, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to go around wasting soup, you shouldn't be saying things like that. But I don't think that works at the end. That rhetorical. She picks up the tin of soup and she says, "They can't even afford to heat this soup." Well, yeah.
So let's have more oil.
Yeah, more oil. So their organisation should be called Just Have More Oil, really, rather than.
We found it. We found that organisation. That'd be great.
Just More Oil.
Just More Oil.
You've convinced me, pink haired woman. Yeah. Anyway, that was Twits on Twitter. We hope you enjoyed that. Please send in your tweets to us for candidacy for Twits on Twitter, because we want them, and it will save me having to do any research. So
I have to say, I'm a great admirer of Van Gogh, and and someone who loves going to galleries. I've taken my kids over the years and bored them rigid, taking them to see great masters and what have you. My wife and I, this is a real joint passion. I found myself incredulous at this. If that had damaged one of the greatest pieces of art by that moron, I honestly, if I was the judge, I'd give them life imprisonment or exiled them to the Arctic. It just strikes me as that sort of, Guardianista, Marxist revolutionary.
Yep.
Whose life is so bland and one-dimensional that they cannot see. They've become blinded even to the beauty of art and its preciousness. Clearly that picture in that gallery is, in a sense, corporately owned by all of us.
By humanity, yeah.
By humanity.
Yeah.
And to willfully destroy something. I mean, what is it's sort of eco-terrorism, really, isn't it? I mean, if you think of what ISIS were doing in some of these archaeological sites, when they had captured Iraq.
At least that's
I found myself getting quite wound up, really, by this, and thinking, where is the general public? Where were the security in not completely taking this person down on the floor?
It would have been much better if it ended with some massive security guard coming in and sort of doing a huge rugby tackle and putting the cuffs on, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, years ago, my son, when he was about 5, accidentally knocked over a pile of bricks in Tate Modern. and all hell broke loose. And we have a joke in our family.
In a chokehold. This 5-year-old in a chokehold over some bricks.
The security guard shouted, "There's an installation down."
Oh my goodness!
And lights are flashing and what have you.
On this one, you can hear in the background. You probably didn't hear in the recording, but you can just hear this timid old soul saying, "I don't know if he's old, but this timid soul saying, security. Can we have some security in here, please?"
And the world's most famous pictures about to be destroyed.
Oh, it's lame. The security is terrible. Imagine how many millions more that would get if it was a massive ruckus. Some guys came in and just started. They're all rolling around covered in super glue. All the soup flying everywhere. You can only dream of these, I suppose.
I know.
We don't live in such an exciting world. Anyway, that's Twits on Twitter for this week. Now, chaps, the big story of the week clearly is what's going on in the government. We've all been hearing about it all week. Sorry, we had a prime minister. Everyone thought, oh yeah, Liz Truss, she's going to be the prime minister for a while. She's had this mini budget. The markets didn't like it, we're told. So she fired the man who she instructed to implement it. And she's hired Jeremy I Heart the Chinese Communist Party Hunt, who is now the de facto prime minister, because Liz Truss can't fire him, so he can do whatever he wants. And he's reversed almost all of her tax cuts from the budget, thoroughly humiliating her. And now everybody is saying that we are looking at Liz Truss not being around for very long, and another prime minister coming in soon. Will it be Jeremy Hunt? Will it be some kind of unity candidate? Will it be a caretaker? Will it be Boris Johnson? Because the way things are going, it looks like the Tory party are finished. It's been quite.
It's effectively a coup by the sort of left-wing end of the Tory party, which, depending on who you are, you could call them One Nation, you could call them Tory wets. Quite often, you hear that.
I was thinking of wet wipes when I hear that.
And
maybe it's because I spend so much time changing children's nappies at the moment. But
and effectively, Jeremy Hunt. Now he's been chosen by. I mean, at least. Liz Truss was not, in fact, shy about her intentions. When she was chosen as prime minister by the Tory party, she said what she was going to do, and then she did what she had said. Effectively, she went a little bit further, actually. But it's worth remembering that all she was doing was returning the tax base back to 2021. I think. She wasn't even really cutting much tax. She was just not implementing tax increases. The reason being that she felt, as did I think the party membership, that lower taxes led to more growth. We had this discussion 2 weeks ago, and that the only way out of where we are is to acknowledge is to try and supercharge the growth of the economy rather than anything else. Now. The markets didn't like that, but the market. I've read quite a nice little pithy comment. I mean, it's not the markets. I mean, what does the markets even mean? It was bond traders who didn't like it. It was people who've been making a buck off of the low interest rates and the sort of loose policy that's been going on that didn't like it. So using that, and I think what we've seen really is a coup by the Wets, masterminded by Gove, by Rishi Sunak, to install their own chancellor in and effectively neuter the sort of small state classical liberal side of the party for a generation, maybe.
Have either of you ever seen the film The Manchurian Candidate?
No, I've never seen it. I often hear it referenced, and I think to myself, I don't know what that is.
There's a 1962 version, which is brilliant.
Who's in it, Daniel?
Oh gosh, in the 1962 version, it is.
Is it Frank Sinatra?
It is Frank Sinatra. Yeah.
Yeah, because the modern one's got Denzel Washington. I haven't seen either of them, but
the newer one is not bad either. But I think the 62 one is more watchable, more believable in a sort of Hitchcockian kind of way. Sort of
Denzel, of course, being in Crimson Tide as well. He's quite a good actor.
Oh yeah, that's the link. Yeah.
Liev Schreiber, if I pronounced his name right. He in the new version, the 2005. Version, he plays the candidate. It's a sort of it's almost a Macbeth-like story, but in terms of people behind a candidate pushing him forward and creating this perfect political person who can be controlled. Yes. And I somehow. I couldn't help but think of this film when I was watching the Chancellor's speech. I thought I must revisit it.
Yeah, I mean, Jeremy Hunt has this kind of these sort of very strange starey eyes, doesn't he? Like he's some kind of robot. don't you think? When you look at his face, it's like it's not really clear that there's a sort of human consciousness.
Yeah, which is part of the Mancunian candidate is that that they have created this sort of biological, perfect Messiah-like politician.
Yeah,
through all sorts of technological wizardry and what have you.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely say that Hunt is a Messiah-like. I would say he's more machine-like. I mean, like many of the Tory party, he seems to lack any kind of human personality, doesn't he? When you listen to him talk, there's nothing distinctive about his voice. He's just got this kind of bland accent and way of speaking, which is it's like if you were to design a sort of middle-class English accent on a computer, that's the way it would sound. Sorry,
we sort of know where he stands, don't we? We know that he's anti-Brexit, and he was pro
people in their houses,
pro-locking people in their houses. He was very much against. He was very much in favour of a second referendum as we went through the leadership thing was his big thing. So he wanted to keep returning the question of Brexit to the people until they got the answer that he felt was right, which is not really the point of democracy. He's consistently not been particularly. He's been not liked. But he's certainly a tool of I think he's a tool of a sort of a faction which probably extends beyond the Conservative Party that are following sort of slightly blindly this instruction from to keep things going really, and rather than what
do you mean, Tom? What's the instruction? Where's this instruction?
Austerity is
going down the rabbit hole here.
I'm going to say it's sounding like you're going into territory that you're normally quite reluctant to.
I just think
who's doing these instructions? Is it?
I don't know.
King? Is it?
No,
Schwab? Carry on, Tom.
Isn't he put together a financial sort of team, an advisory team with sort of everyone from the all made up all of sort of people who've been big players in the major financial institutions and effectively people who've benefited from having very low interest rates and don't want to see it change. The problem is you can't keep kicking the can down the road. We can't keep printing money. If you make the state much bigger, then there won't be anything but state. There won't be any productivity. If you increase taxes, then people are going to stop spending, which won't help the economic spiral at all. I mean, this is what Cheryl Jacobs makes the point she makes in this Telegraph article, isn't it? That actually austerity has not worked and didn't work back when money was actually quite cheap and won't work now that it's getting more expensive.
So this is a really important thing that Cheryl Jacobs says, and this is the thing is just to be quite honest, is I don't really understand economics all that well. It's not an area that I am fully conversant in, but I did feel like we were being, as she says, I do think she's right when she said we were being gaslit by proponents of Project Fear, because what we're being told is that what has happened is an experiment in what are we calling
libertarian? They call it libertarian, but it's not, of course. But anyway.
And it's all gone wrong, and this shows that this is not going to work, and it never can work, and it's the death of this idea, this kind of Hayekian school of economics, and so on. But it seems to me, even with the limited knowledge of economics, that this is nonsense, because it could be the case, theoretically, that these were actually very sensible things to do, but that they were communicated to people in the wrong way, that they were implemented in a foolish way, and that people like Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng just didn't have the sort of political capital or competency to pull them off. So to me, it doesn't sort of put paid to the idea that we should have lower taxes and do all the things that there are other things that they were suggesting we do. It just means it wasn't done very well. Also, the other thing, this is an economic question, but so they wanted to lower taxes, but they were also increasing spending on or government borrowing anyway, because they wanted to borrow something, or they wanted to spend something like £200 billion subsidizing people's energy bills. So that's not really liberal economics, is it? Because or libertarian economics, because that's a kind of big state socialist move, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, certainly. Although, I mean, the argument made at the time was that by limiting gas price rises to the household, i.e. the government stepping in to pay the extra, actually reduced inflation, which reduced the cost of government bonds. So in the long run, it's funny money effectively, because but they've cut back on that, haven't they? So now it's only till April, and then we'll all see our gas bills go up for the beginning, early spring. You just wait for a cold.
If you've got a low growth, if the economy hasn't grown, what state we're going to be in then? You know, as you said, you're just kicking the can forward. It reminded me, having been reading at the same time about the fall of Rome, how there's a lot of comparisons to back then to now in terms of, you know, huge vanity projects, inflation that no one seemed to sort of be that particularly bothered about, but they were mass producing coinage to the point where it had almost no value. That there was all sorts of problems in the farming sector, and that farmers were derided in the end because they were seeing the economic reality face on, and coming to the point, when it comes to the point where you welcome the barbarians because actually you might be able to afford a living. Do you know what I mean?
Take over, yeah. They take over and trash your
take
society.
over and
bring their competency.
Similar sort of mindset happening, where a sort of a bourgeois class are very comfortable while everything else is sort of rotting around because it's founded on funny money and huge Caesar projects, which are either sort of lazy economics because the empire has overexpanded itself, and I think there's a similarity to what we've got at the moment. Maybe we've overexpanded ourselves. We've printed money to the point of being drunk on it. We've spent £500 billion on lockdowns and COVID measures, and we never really dealt. I think getting from Jacobs's essay in the Telegraph, we never really got our head around a proper way to deal with the austerity crisis that we had in 2008.
Well, it was no. What happened in 2008 is that we bailed out, so that we started the process of effectively. I think the sort of glib way of putting it is we privatized profits, but we socialized losses. So banks that failed because they made risky investments were not allowed to fail. And I mean, arguably, if they'd been allowed to fail, then the rot and the canker could have been excised from the system. But we've not done that.
Yeah. So I'll just read a couple of paragraphs here because I think that this article is really good. So here's just a few paragraphs. First, to be clear, the notion that this crisis was caused by Brexit is bunkum. Britain has been tipped into an inflation nightmare by COVID lockdowns and the accompanying splurges of government funds aided by excessive money printing, as well as the energy turmoil wreaked by the Ukraine war. Nor is the fiscal strategy of the new Chancellor Jeremy Hunt to return to economic prudence. His announcement today was a victory for the destructive neoliberal orthodoxy that favours austerity and balancing the books over generating growth. By sacrificing almost all of Liz Truss's tax cuts on the altar of market stability, Hunt has ensured that the country will suffer a longer and harder recession. By pursuing spending cuts at the same time as raising taxes, he has allowed the country to be tipped into a doom loop of drained public services and stagnant growth. Far from escaping the clutches of ideology, Hunt is now doubling down on a neoliberal dogmatism. It started with Osborne's failed austerity gamble, which had little basis in mainstream macroeconomics, and reached new heights with Theresa May's decision to make net zero commitments law without bothering with proper costings. It culminated in the last government's arrogant technocratic belief that it could shut down the economy and then reset it through quantitative easing.
Yeah.
Pretty, I mean, as I say, I'm not an expert, but it does seem...
There's an underlying moral story here, isn't there, which I think is sadly missed by the churches or the hierarchy. That it's very easy, for instance, for prelates in the House of Lords to poo-poo, say, trickle-down economics, and essentially argue for nothing but the status quo. And the Archbishop of Canterbury did this recently, I think only a few days ago.
Yeah, he did.
Started going on about Keynesian economics and whatever. And when the rich get richer, they just save it. Well, Keynes, I thought, was writing nearly a century ago, and things have changed since. That again, it's this very sort of binary block view of things, which doesn't help. But also, I think there's a moral story here that's missing, in that we've created an economy, or we've allowed an economy to evolve over a time, which where individual responsibility is largely hogwashed, and also sort of small corporations having care for individuals, not treating them as just simply economic units, has also been pushed away, because the state will do all of that. There's always this bigger thing will take away the responsibilities that we can't possibly manage, when I think we can manage them. And then money that's built on money, and debt that works on debt. It's all a sort of powder house, really, of nothing, isn't it?
It is, and especially when the debt turns out to be bad, which was again that was the problem with in 2008, and continues to be an issue. I think the Archbishop was particularly foolish as well. I mean, how does he think the world got wealthy in the 19th century before all this government? Because standards of living manifestly increased for both the richest and the very poorest. In fact, I believe that through the years, that generally growth and investment by wealthy people has been a good thing for those under their who they've employed, etc., etc. And it's not that unreasonable to say. Now, that's actually the sort of globalization, if anything, and sort of the creed of New Labour and no doubt Archbishop's preferred sort of politics has seen that money become funny money and sort of accrual. I believe that the difference between the richest and the poorest has got bigger and bigger over and maybe trickle down has stopped working, but it's not because it's improper, I think, idea in itself. It's because they've been allowed to the sort of idea of a moral responsibility of those who have over those who don't has faded. The great Quaker. I was reading about the Rowntree family. That's a good example. The sort of Quaker magnates of the 19th century. The industrialists.
I've done a couple of weddings of the original family, actually. Yeah.
But they're all over the country. You find them everywhere. A businessman who did really well, and then invested a lot of money into their employees, health and safety, and building them good housing, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you see it in the model villages of the coal mines. I was in Bolsover in the summer, and they've got a beautiful village built for the coal mine workers there that was built by the owners of the coal mine. It's a sort of model village. What's gone wrong is not necessarily the financial system, but the lack of morality in those who are gaining wealth, but also the ability to move wealth offshore to not otherwise to sit on stupid amounts. Probably doesn't help either.
So yeah, I mean, that would be a critique of a purely libertarian economic policy, wouldn't it? That you have no obligation to to employ people in your own country and base your business in your own country. You could just you should be able to do it anywhere. But I mean, I think to my fairly simple take on this, part of the problem is the question of inequality, isn't it? I mean, the left wing economic instinct is to say that there's something fundamentally immoral about any inequality, even if poor people are actually benefited by inequality in a funny way, because the pie gets bigger and then the poor have more, but then so do the rich. So inequality grows.
There's the famous.
The poor are still getting richer. So, but what the left mindset thinks about that is that there should be no inequality. If people have more, they should be that more should be taken and redistributed. Yeah. And to my mind, it seems like it would be better for everyone if the pie could just continue to grow. And so we've got ultra rich people, but so what? Everyone's life is improving. I mean, I know it's quite a simple take, but that's just what I've thought for a long time.
Well, I mean, it's a sort of real sort of sense. Is the difference between a real politic and not in a sense, isn't it? I kind of agree. I mean, I think that the rich people should be doing the best. If you are super rich, like seriously consider, whether that's imperiling your salvation. Firstly, seriously consider it, and secondly, once you've considered that it probably is, give away as much as you can. But otherwise, it's controlling you, and you're not putting God where it needs to be. But other than that, I wouldn't force.
It's a question of responsibility, though, isn't it, Tom? That's to whom much is given, much will be expected. So if you've got lots of money, you have a responsibility to steward that money in a way which is godly, and that's a lot harder to do when you've got lots of money.
I suppose if we have the breakdown of that Christian ethic, which Tom's just described, then what you will have is a sense you will have that kind of cultural breakdown, whereas I suspect there were 2 or 3 generations back, and certainly in the Victorian period, philanthropy was seen as a very virtuous and good and godly thing to do. It's sort of part of your not only being a good citizen, but it was a working out of your salvation. It's how you negotiated your soul with the transcendent. I don't mean that in a transactional way, but it was the right thing to do. Was that you had been given this wealth, and you had a certain duty to God and to country to make it work and benefit others. I think if you've got that, if the scripture no longer informs us, then we're not going to have recourse to that. What we have instead is very sort of bland, flat ideologies, don't we? Like the eco.
You do have philanthropists like Bill Gates. Gives a lot of money away. But I'm just trying to think about what's the difference. I think it's to do with him demanding almost control and imprinting his desires through his wealth on other people, and that's not actually particularly philanthropic. He also tends to give a lot of his money to sort of faceless corporations as well, which doesn't.
He gives his money to people so long as they give him influence in their organization. So it's a way of controlling organizations and corporations, isn't it? Media corporations, universities, and so on and so forth. But chaps, it's obviously a big story. Be interesting to see how things continue. It is looking quite likely at the moment that the Conservative Party may be finished, but I was hearing that there doesn't have to be a general election until the beginning of 2025.
One suspects that Liz could bring that about. I mean, there are two.
At the end of the Tory party.
No, the general election, should she wish. And
why would she wish that?
Well, if she's trapped without any power, what the hell?
Just put Labour in.
Well, I know, but I mean, in a sense, like, what's the difference between a Hunt budget and a Labour budget? I mean, there's one.
I think things could get a lot worse, to be honest.
Probably, but
consider the time that since Labour have been in power, how far culture has moved on.
I think we should probably reserve some of this for a guest in a few weeks, because it'll be interesting on it. But can
we tell people what that is? Because we can.
Can we? Shall we?
Yeah. So we're coming up to 100 episodes, and we've got the great Peter Hitchens joining us. He has said he will be with us for the 100th episode. So we're going to do a special exclusive interview with him. I don't know, it's not exclusive, is it? He's giving interviews to other people, but we've got him on, so that would be super. He's long said that the Tories are not Tory. They need to go out of power. They need to be reformed. They need to the sort of neoliberal
element of them need to be stripped out and go wherever they belong, probably Liberal Democrats. I mean, Hunt would be probably a better Liberal Democrat than a Tory in many ways.
Hunt would be a better Chinese communist. He's literally praised the Chinese Communist Party for abducting people and putting them in.
He must dread that video interview that he did.
It's shocking. And he was talking about forced vaccination.
Maybe he doesn't. Maybe he seriously doesn't.
But the point is that you've got what I mean. Actually, there's something I saw in one article that mentioned that actually Labour are officially more in agreement with the previous budget than the current chancellor. Like there's 19% as a tax cut for the lowest chunk, which was going to be 19%. He's rolled back on that as well. That actually Labour agreed with. So,
it just the thing is like all of this just shows ideological incoherence, doesn't it? It shows, like when I was saying about this thing about, this is showing that Hayekian economics is dead, but it's not even none of this is a straightforward expression of any political economic ideology. It's all.
Well, it's just what the markets want, which is when I said, someone else is controlling this. Really, it's just what's happened is the people who have benefited from funny money want funny money to continue and have engineered a coup in order to keep their person. The markets threw a tantrum and got what they wanted. They got a market.
But Tom, this is global. This is global control, isn't it? This is what we've been wondering about. Like, who is really in charge? Who is in charge? Anyway, maybe we should leave it with that question, because we do need to do a bit of question the Rev before we finish. So let's turn our thoughts now to the great questions that we've been given this week for Question the Rev. I love this theme tune. I love that little. It's kind of it's pizzicato, isn't it? On the strings, is it? Let's listen to it again, shall we? You can hear it.
It is pizzicato.
You hear it?
Oh no, that's just sort of. That's pizzicato, but there's also a bit of what you sort of might call sort of marcato, a sort of a passinato, kind of like that sort of quite heavy strings.
What's a marcato? I don't know that one.
It's a whole episode that we look forward to hearing in the future.
Exactly.
Thank you, Jack.
If people haven't stopped listening already,
that's a good one. Do you know what? The first one I can answer straight away. James Carter.
What? Sorry.
I can answer that straight away because I know about this because I did a funeral for a clergyman.
All right. So should we actually say what the question is first?
Our clergy body's placed facing
at funerals.
Yeah.
You've got to say at funerals first, because otherwise it doesn't make any sense.
At funerals, a clergy body's placed away the opposite way to lay people. And the answer is they can be. I mean, they don't have to be, but they can be. And then they're buried the other way around as well. The idea being that you'll face your flock at the general resurrection, which is a really nice...
quite a nice image, isn't it?
Sort of literalistic image of the general resurrection. So yeah, you can be.
Yeah. Interesting stuff. Also raised the question of whether or not people continue to be priests in the resurrection. I
doubt it.
Still have priests.
You
would say that. You would say that. I could have guessed. I didn't even need you to say that, because I could have said, I know what Tom thinks already without him saying it. He would say no.
It's because we're just specific examples of the priesthood of all believers, aren't we? So
I'm not sure what that's supposed to mean, but maybe we shouldn't pursue that any further. Needless to say, there are other available. Right, let's move on. Oh, let's do this one. Do you think the Book of Enoch is significant? It used to be part of the Bible. It got taken out. That's quite a statement, isn't it? I don't think that's true personally, but
no. Well, it is. It's part of the Ethiopian churches. The Coptic Ethiopian Church do acknowledge it as a scripture, but no other churches do.
Right. Okay. It's quoted in the New Testament, isn't it? In the book of Jude? It's quoted or somewhere. I'm just looking up. Yeah, it's quoted in the book of Jude. It's basically a what do you call it?
Well, a pseudepigrapha is where it exists now, which I've got a copy of, and it is in there indeed. It's a wacky book. It's good fun. I like it a lot. But it's not scripture.
And also this idea, when it says it used to be part of the Bible, it got taken out. I don't know. I think that kind of betrays a naivety about how the canon of scripture came together. It wasn't like there was a sort of contents page which everyone agreed on, and they were kind of, taking some bits out and putting other bits in. It was like a consensus that was established over a long period of time by the church. So
the first lists of books are early first century, aren't they?
No, not early first century, Tom.
Second century. Ignatius.
No,
Ignatius?
the heretic Marcion is the first one.
And then Ignatius of Leon gives the second one, which
that may be true. Yeah,
which substantially has most of the books we have today. There's a couple of the pastoral epistles that aren't in there,
but what I'm saying is that idea. It was in the Bible and it was taken out. That's the kind of Dan Brown idea, isn't it? That you had this like cabal of people.
It's also got caught up. I noticed on YouTube. There's plenty in my feed anyway, so seemingly kind of matching it up with alien conspiracy theories.
Because it's all about the Nephilim and everything like that, isn't it? These giants that are mentioned in Genesis before the flood. Interesting stuff. So I think the long and the short of it is we don't really know, and probably the answer is not all that significant, but still interesting. Okay, next question, completely different. Is it okay for churches to charge entry? There's scare quotes around charge entry. I'm not really sure. Charge entry to e.g. cathedrals. It feels instinctively wrong, so I walk on by. Well, good for you. I'm pleased.
It's not. I don't know. I sort of debate this one sometimes in my head because if you're just going to the church to look at the pretty pictures and to see the architecture, then it's right that maybe that you contribute to it as a tourist, like you might if you went into a National Trust house or whatever. If you're going there for spiritual reasons, then obviously you shouldn't be charged. But generally speaking, I do not know of a single cathedral or large church that won't allow you to go into a dedicated chapel to pray without charging you.
Tom, I find that to be somewhat I don't know. I used to work in a cathedral where they charged. Not that makes me some kind of authority, but I felt I felt then, as I do now, that there is a problem. There's a serious problem with having some kind of barrier at the entrance to any church, even if what you're doing is suggesting that people give a donation or suggesting that people pray I should say, even if you are making a chapel available for private prayer or something like that, it seems to me to be to put a literal barrier between people and the Church of God. And I do feel uncomfortable about it. And I just wonder, and I'm not saying I understand, but, I used to work in a cathedral where there are lots of people working for the cathedral in the offices, being paid lots of money to do that. I wonder if, again, it's this thing of the central bureaucracy costing all this money and needing to be justified. And so therefore they need to find more money. Could you not make it to the case that entrance is always free? But if you want to do certain things, like, for example, have a tour or go to a specific gallery or something like that, you could charge for those things and have the cathedral open. That's all I'm saying. I understand.
I agree. I think it changes the demeanour of how people engage with the space. If you engage with the space as a tourist, if we presume that that's what you are on the whole, as a visitor, and that's how we want you to behave, then I think it doesn't do God or the building any good service, because then it becomes a museum. I mean, I can recall when I worked in Canterbury Cathedral, someone shouting out as the chaplain did the hourly prayer slot over the tannoy, "I've paid £7 and no one's going to tell me to stop."
Just what were they doing?
The invitation was for everyone to pause for 30 seconds.
Right, okay,
say the Lord's Prayer, have a moment of reflection. And I think they got shushed down by a verger. And so this little raucous broke out. Well, I'm here as a tourist. I'm not a religious person. I didn't come here seeking this. I've paid my money and now I've got my rights, so I think there is that. And I think if you look at TripAdvisor for a lot of the cathedrals and look at the comments, to take a family into one of these cathedrals that is charging, it's £30-40.
Oh, it's ridiculous.
£30-40 to see this what could be evangelizing event. Now,
well, I mean, I see, I'm a bit sceptical.
How much of a turn-off is that?
Oh, it's awful. Go on, Tom.
I'm a bit skeptical that
experience.
I'm a bit skeptical that the cathedral itself will engender some sort of religious. I mean, like the services.
Of course, you are. Here we go.
I mean, you can still go and hear the word preached.
Let's destroy all the statues. Let's break all the stained glass. Let's whitewash all the mosaics.
I just think, if you want to go to a service, if you want to go to cathedral for free, go to the service. And when you've gone to the service, then you can generally wander around a bit. They don't shove you out. And there are plenty of them in the cathedral. You could probably go to morning prayer. You could probably find an evening.
I think it's just our understanding of what that space is.
Yeah. No, it's
probably very different. I would see it as a sacred space.
Yeah.
Not
to be profited from. Yeah. No, but it's quite illustrative, isn't
and
it?
The building itself is in many ways a kind of I'm not going to say a sacrament, but its very architecture preaches something in itself.
Yep, I agree, Daniel. I agree.
And I think if we sort of turn that into just a museum, we really lose something.
Yeah, well, I mean, it goes to the very heart of the Reformation, I would say. In fact, it goes to the heart of central controversy in all Christian thought, which is the relationship between nature and grace. But I don't think we're going to be able to resolve it right now.
9.
That's a special.
9.
It is a special. All right, Tom's shouting 9 now. I think we should move on. Right. Okay, here we go. All right. So when I get people asking about end times things. So that I normally ignore it because I just don't want to talk about it. But
we have talked about it.
Oh, we talked about loads. Anyway, let's do a couple here. Is the rapture a thing where Christians are protected from all the suffering at the end of days by going on holiday with Jesus for 3 years? Another one is, do you believe current events are the start of the fulfillment of biblical prophecy regarding the end times and the rapture of the church? Different people. Now, I want to just answer this quickly. Do you believe current events are the start of the fulfillment of biblical prophecy regarding the end times? I don't know personally, but I think what I always caution against is parochialism about our own time. This is, things are so extreme. It must be the end of the world. Well, people have always thought that. Okay. And we don't know. It might be, but let's face it, it could very well not be. And, I had somebody say this the other day, we might be the early Christians. This might just be the beginning. The world might go on and on and on for thousands of years. And people in the future, in 10,000 years, like theology students in the future might say things like, who came first? Was it Athanasius or was it John Calvin? Because I get them mixed up in my mind. The point being...
Oh, you're going to say the Irreverend podcast.
Who came first? Was it Ignatius of Antioch or was it the Irreverend vicar? Because in my mind, they will get blurred into one. The point is, we just don't know. So don't think that your time in history is the most important time there's ever been, because everybody... Go on, Tom.
It's also worth noting that things sort of type, the Bible and prophecy sort of work in types. You might see echoes of the types of things that are going to happen at any age, They're but they're not necessarily definitive. It's not. They're images. Yeah. There's a lovely science fiction story series which I've only read the first book of. It's sort of young adult, which sort of envisions a Christianity that a society in which Christianity has conquered. Everyone is who is alive is a Christian and who and it's interstellar, and so that they go out into the worlds.
What's it called, Tom?
I cannot remember. I'll look it up. But
that's post-millennialism in action, isn't it? There?
Yeah.
I mean, extreme. That's like radical post-millennialism, like going out. Not only to
somehow we've got to be careful, particularly as an established church, that we are so anodyne to the apocalypse that we end up becoming sort of parochial in another way, because that can be the way that we relate to power. I put it this way: I think in some ways it's one of the deficiencies of Anglicanism that we don't have almost any attention to end times.
Yes, it's true.
The apocalypse.
Yeah.
Our sense of time is very much things go along, plod along, and here we are, the Church of England, happily, merrily in the sort of well, we're not in the middle of cultural life anymore, but we have a certain privileged position, and clearly, our first century forebears, particularly St. John in his Revelation, had a very different experience and opening to the mind of God in how history progresses. And I think we just got to be careful that we don't present a comfortable Christianity. And I think sometimes what we can learn from the more apocalyptic versions of Christianity is that edge and that being stripped and pushed to the margins is actually quite an important part of the Christian faith. But of course, there's a hysterical version of that as well, and you can see a lot of that in some of the more, extreme ends of American Bible Belt Christianity.
Yeah, I think you can see it a lot in the kind of internet reaction to the last couple of years as well. And, sometimes I felt like, the world is ending and like things are descending into some kind of, globalist technocratic nightmare. But I think that, we do have to have a level of self-awareness about this, don't we? Where we think, well, is it really the end of the world? Am I getting a bit carried away here? Is it really plausible that I'm living at the exact moment when the Antichrist is appearing among us, or perhaps I'm overrating the importance of this particular moment? I think that's what I was trying to get at earlier. Also, no, let's not go into that. The rapture. The rapture, meaning that Christ returns and takes the church from the earth to heaven and leaves everyone else on the earth to go through the tribulation, which is described in the book of Revelation. I don't know. I don't believe in that, because I think it was made up by J.N. Darby in the 19th century.
There's a sort of, it's sort of biblical language, but it's never actually described in the Bible, is it? In that fulsome way. I mean, you get in Thessalonians, you get that
it's
the idea of the trumpet snatching people up, but that doesn't say that's simply a harbinger of the final days. There's no sort of set time or anything like that, and it's to do with the resurrection of the dead.
And I think also that there's Christian spirituality. Maybe this is very Catholic spirituality, but that sees that we suffer with people. I'm not trying to be disobedient to the Lord in any way on this, but I think if the world's in crisis, I don't want to be taken away at that point. I'd feel it was my moral duty to be with people in the midst of that moment.
Yeah, and also there's a sense in which the Christian life of discipleship is a following after Christ, isn't it? Taking up your cross and following Christ. And to my mind, I mean, judging between the kind of sensibilities of premillennial views of the future and post-millennial, I think that's the best argument to my mind in favor of a premillennial view, where Christians go through the tribulation and suffer and things get worse on earth, and we're called to be faithful and there's only a remnant left. I think one of the best arguments anyway in favor of that view is that this is congruent with our general calling as disciples of Christ, to suffer with Christ, to be hated by the world, to be rejected by the world, and nevertheless to be faithful. But the post-millennial view, in saying, the church is going to be successful, everyone's going to become a Christian, that dynamic would be reversed in such a narrative. That doesn't mean it's wrong. I'm just saying,
it's a sort of psychological prosperity gospel, isn't it? That sometimes is being pushed on that we're the good guys and we're going to be sucked up into heaven when things, go completely apeshit, and
the rapture. That's the rapture, yeah. So to distinguish between 2 points of view, so the rapture would be that the church is taken up into heaven. The post-millennial view would be that the church is ultimately successful on earth and everybody becomes a Christian, much like the sci-fi novel Tom was talking about.
I found a name. It's the Lamb Among the Stars. It's the Shadow. So it's the first one is the Shadow at Night. Is that right? Yeah. And it's by Chris Wally. It's got quite good Amazon reviews.
That's an unfortunate name, isn't it?
The Shadow at Evening. The Shadow at Evening.
No, I mean Chris Wally. That can't be a pen name, can it? You wouldn't choose the last name Wally.
W-A-L-L-E-Y. It's not Wally.
Could be worse. Could be witty. Couldn't it?
Chris Whitty.
Or it could be Whaley.
Anyway, Whaley would have an H,
Chris
wouldn't it?
Wally.
Wally.
If he's American, he'd be Wally, wouldn't he? Chris Wally.
Wally. It probably is American. It was quite interesting. I've never finished the series. I got given the first novel by my uncle and aunt when I was confirmed, I think, and I read it and I thought that was good. I reread it some years ago and thought it's quite peaceful and it's quite spiritual. But sort of the idea is that it's on a faraway planet. On the faraway planet of Farholm, humans live in peace under the gentle rule of the Assembly, Christian organizations. War and evil, ancient history. But suddenly, almost imperceptibly, things begin to change. Slowly, a handful of men and women begin to realize that evil has returned and it must be fought. So it's a sort of post-millennial, but they plus evil mysteriously surviving somehow. It's interesting anyway. It's yeah.
Yeah, well, that's good. Chaps, we've been going for quite a while now, so we should probably leave it there.
Yep.
But thank you for all your questions, the Revs. And if you'd like to question us, then do send in any questions you might have for this particular segment of the show. We might read them out, maybe. Little tip for anyone who's trying to get a question to Rev in. It's better if they're short and pithy. It's nice that we've got quite a few long comments here, but we can't really, it kind of mitigates against the quick fire nature of Question the Rev. So just nice and short and pithy. I just wanted to just give a shout out for people who have bought us coffees online. We've got a number of people who have left us nice messages, and thank you to everyone who's done that. You can find details about how to support us on our website, irreverendpod.com. Just to read a couple of out. Alex bought us 3 coffees. Thank you, Jamie, Daniel, and Thomas, for all the work and care you put into your podcast. Listening to what you have to say has made me a much more reflective, thoughtful Christian and has opened up areas of thinking about my faith that I had never considered before. Thank you. I don't always agree with you, but I know you don't always agree with one another, and that is so important. You demonstrate that we can disagree and still respect one another. And most importantly, I can see that you all think really carefully about the issues you cover. Keep up great work. Thank you, Alex. This is one I like from Mr. Thornhill. Thornhill. Where's that name from? Is the character in North by Northwest? Is his last name Thornhill? I think it is, played by Cary Grant. Anyway, I doubt it's him because he's a fictional character. He bought us 5 coffees. Thank you.
Oh, wow.
The Reverend Tom's Lord's Prayer with the witch arts and the in-earths is the best. Look forward to your thoughts and words every week. Thank you for your precious work.
I will be doing it in Greek next week.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Even better.
Indeed he will. But thank you for that. So just to be clear, Buy Me a Coffee is a website where you can make a donation in lieu of buying us a coffee to help us run the podcast and finance future events and any overheads we have and so on and so forth. So if you'd like to support us in that way or on Patreon, you can do so by going on our website, irreverendpod.com, and clicking on either the big red or the big yellow button. We do really appreciate any support anyone gives us. On Patreon, you can support us for £1.50 a month. So it's very, very cheap to do so, and you get the episodes early and so on. But now it's time to say goodbye. So yeah, thanks chaps for your presence here. I've enjoyed this episode. I hope you have as well.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, you sound like you have, Tom.
I have very much. Thank you everyone for listening.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Well, thank you. So thanks everyone. And we should say a prayer, shouldn't we? I always forget this. Who would say a prayer? Come on. We're all priests here, literally.
I'll say a prayer.
Go on, Daniel.
May God give us the grace to follow him and to know that he who asks us to take up his cross says that his burden is light, his yoke easy, and the blessing of God Almighty, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit be with us and remain with us all. Amen.
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 All right. Well, until next time,
bless you.
Goodbye from Tom and Daniel.
Goodbye.
Until next time, it's goodbye from Tom and Daniel.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
And it's also goodbye from me. Goodbye.